Hello everyone, this is Ahmed Gamal speaking. I'm going to focus on the narrative of Western literary criticism in this presentation. I would like to answer many questions, the first of which is, what is the meaning of a narrative? What is so special about any narrative is that it has a complete structure, with a particular beginning, a particular middle, and a particular end. So what kind of approach have I adopted in this presentation? It's a stance or approach taken from narratology. What is narratology? Narratology is the study of narratives. And narratives can be not just narrative texts or stories. They might be any sort of phenomena in the social, political, or economic world. So what's the use of this approach? The use of this approach is so enormous. It can help you with gaining some sort of critical thinking skills and holistic thinking skills. Because all throughout the study of Western literary criticism, you need to tackle schools and concepts in terms of comparison and contrast. And of course, you need to adopt a holistic view of the whole picture of Western literary criticism in its relation to the ingredients or minor components of the whole structure. So the following question is the narrative of Western literary criticism the same in any other cultures or literary criticisms? Of course not. In Arabic culture, for example, we have a different narrative of beginnings. So the beginning of Arabic literary criticism is different. Arabic literary criticism began in connection to rhetoric or al-balagha, while actually Western literary criticism began in connection with philosophy, because Plato and Aristotle are both philosophers and literary critics. The first question is very important. What is a narrative? A narrative is a series of logically and chronologically connected events. So what is so special about narrative is that a point of logical connection between the elements or the constituents of the main whole of the narrative. Of course, here you have an example. The king dies and then the queen dies of sadness. This would help you understand the relation between the first element and the second element, the death of the king and the death of the queen. There is a sort of relationship between the first event and the second one. It's a causal relationship. The same can be applied to the development of literary criticism. For example, in romantic criticism, we have causes for the emergence of romantic criticism. The Industrial Revolution, the American Revolution, and the French Revolution. These are causes for the rise of romantic theories and concepts. And now, of course, we have events as well. So what are events? They are transitions from one state to another. So what's the use of events in Western literary criticism? This concept of events can help you understand that the different phases are just transitions from one step to another, from one case to another. So all throughout these transitions, there is a sort of a pattern that keeps repeated all throughout. And finally, you have actors, not characters, but agents that perform actions. Of course, in the case of Western literary criticism, you have here philosophers and critics. So what is a Western literary criticism narrative? A Western literary criticism narrative is the narrative of the history of the development of Western literary theory from antiquity to modern times. The particular beginning is the Greek and Roman criticism, and the middle is Renaissance criticism, neoclassical criticism, and finally Romantic criticism. And what about the end? The end is the modern literary theory. Okay, it's found in the 20th and 21st century. It consists of many schools, so marking the end of one single theory on the one hand, and the transformation of theory from literary studies to cultural studies. So you have, for example, formalism, structuralism, neo-Marxism, cultural materialism, neo-historicism, feminism, post-colonialism, eco-criticism, reader response theory, post-theory, and the term post-theory indicates a sense of ending for this particular Western literary theory. What about the beginnings of Western literary criticism? Western literary criticism began in classical criticism in Greece and Rome, with Plato as the first godfather of Western literary theory. Plato's idealist theory of forms affected his literary theory. For him, imitation is a sort of corruption of the souls and minds of his people. And then came Aristotle with his empiricist theory of form and matter, a more pragmatic theory, a more realistic theory, more down-to-earth theory. That's why here you have the concept of literary imitation as ideal representation providing aesthetic delight. In the middle, there is a very interesting story, because the first phase of the middle, you have a sort of rewriting of the same opposition between Plato and Aristotle, but in different terms. So in the 16th century, for example, you find Sidney pleading for the metaphorical approach toward poetry and poets, while Johnson is more realistic, adopting a more Aristotelian stance toward literary criticism and drama in general. In the second phase of neoclassical criticism in the 17th and 18th century, you have Dryden, Johnson, Alexander Pope, representing a school different from the previous one. It's a philosophical conservative stance, stressing the significance of unity, order, and tradition. And finally, you have a very striking development in the 19th century, that of Romantic criticism. It's completely different from the previous ones in the middle of the narrative, but in a sense it is a reflection of older stances like that of Plato, for example. Because in Wordsworth and Coleridge we have this subjective idealistic stance, the same as in Plato. So what about the end? The end, okay, is marked by its doubleness. Two stances, like in Plato and Aristotle, the same binarism, the same opposition between two sides of the same coin. We have the realistic discourse schools and we have the figural discourse schools. You have formalism, structuralism, cultural materialism, new historicism, post-colonialism, feminism, and eco-criticism, all focusing on the realistic representation of the world and humans in general. But in figural discourse schools, you have an open-ended, okay, interpretation of texts and the world in postmodernist deconstruction and in reader response theories. The final question to complete the narrative of Western literary criticism is, what are the features of Western literary criticism? Number one is the close connection between Western philosophy and Western literary criticism. Now, Plato and Aristotle, as explained before, are philosophers and literary critics, while actually we have in other cultures different stories and narratives and different beginnings, of course. So here, philosophy can function as the primary fabula, as you see in the slide, and literary criticism as the embedded fabula of Western thought in general. The second feature of Western literary criticism is its systematic doubleness. This sort of opposition between two different stances toward mimesis, or the representation of reality. One standing for the realistic representation of reality, and the other one standing for the figural representation of reality. This sort of opposition or doubleness is based on a study of the representation of reality in Western literature done by a German literary critic and philologist called Erich Auerbach. To give you one example of this opposition between two facets of the same coin, you have Plato, for example, and his theory of mimesis, representing poetry as a copy of forms. So here you have a figural representation of reality, because poetry cannot represent what is real for Plato. Poetry can just represent what is seemingly real but not really real. In Aristotle, you have a different concept, because for him, poetry is an imitation of a serious action. So it's poetry here, represented as a copy of reality. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation, and I would welcome any comments or queries, in this channel.